hello, and welcome to HHH, the podcast where we talk about those horrible humans in history. I am your host, Angela Pearson, and make sure you are liking, subscribing, and sharing this channel with everybody that you know who likes true crime or even fun stories in history. I guess these aren't really fun. They're more creepy and eerie, so they like that kind of stuff. For sure, share it. But today in our episode, we are going back to Africa to talk about another horrible dictator. And I'm sure you can guess where we're going. If you've been listening to all my episodes, I'm sure you can guess in Africa where we are going to be going this time. That is right. We are going to the Republic of Equatorial Guinea, obviously. I mean, I know you were all thinking Ghana, but we are going to the Republic of Equatorial Guinea. Have you ever heard of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea? I mean, I hope so. They're on the map. So if you ever learned that in geography, but have you ever heard anything about this country? And more importantly, have you ever heard of a man named Francisco Macias Nguema? It could be Ngami. I don't know. Nguema. He is our horrible human in history for the day. And I know this is going to be hard to believe. He is so much worse than our friend Idi Amin from Ghana. Like, so much worse. He killed a third of his entire population, and he was known as the Pol Pot of Africa, and that he created the Auschwitz of Africa. Like, this is a bad guy. Like, wait till you hear all the things that he has done. And the fact that I had never heard of this man, and he had killed so many people and destroyed his entire country, was mind-blowing to me, because what he did was so horrendous. It was shocking. I had never heard of it. And if you have, like, give me a thumbs up to show me that you've heard of this person before. If not, like, get ready. The story of Francisco Macias Nguema is mind-blowing. So let's get into this. All right, our new evil, horrible dictator was born January 1st, 1924, with the name of Mezem Ngame, and later actually changed his name to Mase Ngame Biogo Negua Nedong. He also went by Macias Nguema, or Macias, and again, like all the people we've talked about in the past, he is a name changer. He changes his name to fit whatever he's wanting at the time. So for the sake of this episode, I'm going to call him Nguema, just to make it clear. But yeah, just know he changed his name quite a few times. And he was born in Equatorial Guinea, or at the time it was also known as Spanish Guinea. And it's now called the Republic of Equatorial Guinea, and it's located on the west side of Central Africa. It's kind of a smaller country, and it was actually made up of two different parts, Annobon and Bioko, which I love because Bioko used to be called Fernando Poo. I think that's like the best name ever, Fernando Poo. It's great. And it is the only Spanish-speaking country in Africa because they were actually colonized by Spain. Most other parts of Africa were colonized by Britain, but not this area. This area was colonized by Spain, so they only speak Spanish, and they're the only country in Africa to speak Spanish. Now, his parents had actually been expelled from Spanish Guinea from the Wallonetem province in Gabon. Their entire clan actually got expelled, and his clan was the Esanegui clan. So they had all been expelled from Spanish Guinea, and his clan was part of the Fang, Equatorial Guinea's majority ethnic group, which is important. And just keep that in mind because we all know what dictators really like to do with ethnic groups, right? So keep that in mind. He's part of the Fang. It's pronounced Fang, but it's spelled like Fang. So if you ever see it, it looks like you're saying Fang. Anyways, so he grew up in Magomo, and super fun fact, his father was a witch doctor. So he could cast spells and use like dark magic to heal people or curse people or whatever. His father was a witch doctor who allegedly killed his younger brother for a sacrifice. We don't know for sure. That's just one of the stories, is that his father killed his younger brother for a sacrifice for his witch doctoring. But we do know that when Nguema was 9 years old, he actually witnessed his father being beaten to death by a Spanish officer. So that obviously is going to trigger some hatred towards the Spanish. So a week later, actually, his mother committed suicide, and that left him and his 10 siblings orphaned. So he had a lot of siblings, and they were all orphaned at a very young age because of the death of his father and the suicide of his mother. Now, it's safe to say that these events had a pretty deep impact on his psyche and probably had an impact on what he would do later in life. Just thinking about that. So, in addition to the loss of his parents, when he was young, he actually had to fight through several rounds of tuberculosis. So he was a pretty sick child. And because of these illnesses, and they were so severe, he actually ended up having a deep fear of death the rest of his life, which is really ironic, again, considering what he does later in his life to other people. But he himself was terrified of dying because he almost died so many times with tuberculosis. Now, his schooling as a kid was all through Catholic schools, and that was all his primary schools. That's as far as he made it. He just went through primary school, it's all Catholic school, and he changed his name. Again, I told you he changed his name a lot. His name was Francisco Macias Nguema when he got baptized by Spanish Catholic missionaries. So that's why when I first heard his name, Francisco, I was like, that doesn't sound like a name from Africa. It's not. It's a Spanish name because he was baptized into the Spanish Catholic Church. And like I said, for the sake of clarity, we're just going to stick to Nguema for the episode. But because he was taught in the Spanish Catholic school, he could speak Spanish along with his native tongue of Fang. Now, as a teenager, he worked as a servant to wealthy Spanish immigrants, I guess you could call them. So he worked as a servant, and he didn't want to live his whole life being a servant to wealthy Spanish people. So he actually tried to take a civil servant's exam. And he failed that exam the first 3 times he took it. And it said that he only passed the 4th time because of favoritism. They actually really liked him, so they allowed him to pass. So the fact that he failed this test 3 different times actually led to him having a very big inferiority complex when it came to intellectual people or smart people. And he really, really hated smart people. And that is a spoiler for later in the episode. Just keep that hatred in mind. I'm just giving you all kinds of spoilers. He hates smart people. Now, he eventually became a translator and a clerk, and which was part of the government, and he was very, very corrupt. From the get-go, he was corrupt. And with the right bribes to the right people at the right time, he actually started to climb in power pretty quickly because, like I said, he was corrupt and took leaps and bounds in his career. And he was very egotistical and paranoid even before he became a dictator. And we all know dictators eventually become super paranoid. Well, he was already that way before he even got into power. So he was egotistical. People really struggled with him because he had very strange political views. And we'll get into those a little bit. So during at a conference in Madrid, Spain, they were actually discussing independence for Equatorial Guinea in the late 1960s. Nguema was there, and he declared that he saw Hitler was the savior of Africa and was a warrior against imperialism. I don't know if anyone told him about the Nazis' belief in Aryan superiority, or that Nazis were imperialists. I don't know if he knew that. Interesting that he would believe that. And it just kind of proves, why he didn't like smart people. Because apparently he wasn't the brightest light bulb in the package because, yeah, Hitler was the savior of Africa? The what? He wasn't an imperialist? Maybe he didn't know history. I don't know. Anyways, he considered himself to be a Hitlerian Marxist, which is really funny if you have studied either of those ideologies. The two groups, like Nazis and communists, hate each other. They hate each other. So it's interesting that his political views kind of smash them together because he really liked the economic philosophy of Karl Marx, but he loved the authoritarianism and ethno-nationalism of Hitler. So he had to be aware that Hitler really liked the idea that white people were superior, which is weird because he's African. So that means, according to Hitler, he had no value. It's so strange. So when I say he had strange political views, he had really off the wall, made zero sense political views. But anyways, that gives you an idea of his jumping off point as a leader. So in 1968, Equatorial Guinea actually did gain their independence from Spain. And this is where our story really starts to take off. So now that the people were free from Spain, the people of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea had their first and only, I will add, democratic election. Nguema ran with an anti-Spanish spin, he hated Spain, and that's what he banked on, is everyone else would hate Spain. And he really pushed hyper-nationalism. This was super attractive to the voters since they had just been freed from Spain and they were like, yes, it's our own country. We are free. And he would stand on a stage in a street, preaching, trying to get people to vote for him. And he would point to a home that he knew was owned by a European, by a Spaniard, and say, I will make sure that everything in this house will belong to you, the people. And the people in the crowd just ate that up. They really wanted all of that stuff. So in September 1968, he soared to victory and was elected as the president of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea. Now, obviously, the first step any dictator has to take is he had to get rid of all of his political opponents. So in 1969, Nguema began to target all of his political opponents or anyone that was a threat to his power, and he had all of them arrested or killed. That is a true sign of a dictator. When you take office, you jail or kill any of your political opponents, so no one can stand up against you. He actually beat out a man named Bonifacio Ondo Edu, who ran on the idea that they wanted to keep Spain as a ally and wanted to work with them to try and build a better country. And after his loss, Bofico Ondu Edu supposedly, quote unquote, committed suicide. But by suicide, we all know what that means. He was executed because Nguema believed he was planning a coup of everything that he was working to get. So he had other officials taken to jail where they were executed or left to die in their jail cell. And these would be the first of Nguema's paranoid mind thinking that everyone was out to get him. But they were far, far from the last. This is just the beginning. In February of 1969, sorry guys, there's a lot of names that I can't pronounce, and we all know that I'm not good at pronouncing names. So, Atonasio Ndong, he was a foreign minister, was actually accused of a different coup attempt, and he was cornered by Nguema's guards in a building, and they had him surrounded. And that is when he, supposedly jumped from a window to his death. Jumped, right? Like, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. He jumped. But there were actually witnesses who saw that he was actually killed by the guards, thrown out the window by the guards, or that even Nguema was there himself and did it. So even the country's UN ambassador was not safe from this. He was called back, so he was believed to be part of this coup plot. So he was called back to the country and executed within mere minutes of getting off of the plane. Like, can you imagine you're just the UN ambassador doing your job and you get a call like, hey, we need you to come back. Can you come back pretty quick? And you're like, oh, okay, cool, I'll come back. And then you get off the plane and you get shot and killed. For who knows what reason? Yeah. So out of the 12 members of his original cabinet, only 2 of them would survive long enough to see his fall of power. Out of 12 people, only 2. 2/3 of the National Assembly would disappear to never be heard of again. And he has just taken power. If this gives you any idea of the horrors that awaits the people of this country, just buckle up. So Nguema quickly allied himself with the USSR. You don't know what that is, you're super young, and that is Russia before it was Russia again. Yeah, that history, let's not get into it. Anyways, he allied himself with the USSR, Cuba, and North Korea. Now remember, this is in the 1960s/70s, so these were not the good guys in the story. So he allowed the USSR to actually smuggle weapons to other areas in Africa through his country so that the USSR could influence wars in all the regions in Africa. So that's a thing. He even sent his daughter to be educated in North Korea, where Kim Il-sung actually personally supervised her education, which don't you find ironic considering he didn't like educated people? And considering the next thing I'm about to tell you, he hated intellectual people so much that he actually banned the word intellectual and put anyone to death who wore glasses, because apparently if you wear glasses, it makes you smarter? ? So yeah, he hated really smart people. So basically, it was illegal to become educated in the country. He executed anyone who had any kind of degree level, like anyone, because he believed that was the biggest issue plaguing Africa, was educated people. What? What? This kind of attitude proves to me that this guy was a moron and just felt really dumb because he wasn't very smart. So he's like, well, you're smarter than me, so you have to die. He genuinely believed that educated people were polluting their culture with foreign culture. And by the end of his rule, there were only two doctors in the entire country left. 2. Because he had either killed them or they had fled for their lives. And private education was considered subversive and it was banned throughout the country. And because he killed off anyone who was even slightly educated, he left his country in a huge educational void that is still impacting the country to this day. It set them back years and years in progress because now they didn't have anyone who was educated who could help improve the country. So on this is a story that it's pretty creepy to me. So on Christmas Eve in 1969, Nguema would commit the crime that he was most well known for. So he gathered in the National Football Stadium, and by football, I mean soccer if you're an American, football for anybody else. In their National Football Stadium, he had 186 quote-unquote troublemakers brought into the stadium. He had music, specifically Mary Hopkins' 1969 hit, "Those Were the Days, My Friends," if you want to listen to it. It's a banger there. That was blasting over all the speakers in the stadium, and he had his soldiers open fire on the crowd. Just to kill all of them, because, they're troublemakers. Let's get rid of them. Oh, I forgot to mention, the soldiers were dressed up like Santa Claus. Yeah, they were dressed up like good old Saint Nick when they were murdering all of these people. Yeah, they killed 150 of the people that were in the stadium. And that meant there was 36 men remaining. And what did they have them do? They had to dig holes for themselves first. When they jumped in the holes, they were buried all the way up to their necks and then eaten alive by a horde of ants. Yeah, so this guy is a real gem. Let me tell you what. So this is in 1969. He's just taking power, and he's already killed a ton of people. In 1970, he actually outlawed all other existing political parties and made his party the only legal party. And it was called the Partido Único Nacional de Trabajadores, or the PUNT. I butchered that because I don't speak Spanish. So, Partido Único Nacional de Trabajadores Party. That's the only one that you could join. He also organized a youth group called the Juventud en Marcha con Macias. Or basically, for those of you who speak Spanish, I know I butchered that, but it's supposed to be the youth on the march. That's what it's supposed to mean. So if I butcher that Spanish, I'm sorry. Anyways, it was in English, it's called the Youth on the March. And this was equivalent to Hitler's brown shirts or Mao's red guards. Notice they like the color like brown, red. I don't know. Weird. But if you don't know about the brown shirts or the red guards, this is not a good thing. I will tell you what. Basically, this youth group was responsible for torturing, massacring civilians, looting, burning villages, basically just doing all of the dirty work that Nguema wanted done. So he also stripped away any and all of his legal limits to his power. So a pretty well-known dictator move, I am now the supreme power and nothing else applies. So between 1971 and 1973, he took over the legislature, the judicial branch, and the executive branches of government. He gave himself power to call and dismiss the National Assembly, which is basically like the United States Congress. He made it illegal to criticize him and his regime. He gave himself power to appoint or dismiss judges, and he could order any arrest or execution for any reason, ever, at any point. And he gave himself new titles. We love when these horrible humans in history give themselves titles because they are just so phenomenal. Like, here are his: President for Life, Head of the Nation and Party, Grand Master of Education, Science, and Culture. Oh, the irony with that one. Don't even get me started. And then his favorite of all of his titles that he gave himself was the Unique Miracle. The Unique Miracle. Talk about having a aggrandized sense of self, like unique miracle. What on earth? So he had this vision of the country. He wanted to remake the entire country to fit his ideal version of the country. Now, where have we heard this before? We have heard this before. It's literally like replaying history, right? Or it's probably happening at the same time. Never mind. They were doing the same thing at the same time. Anyways, he blocked off a large part of the capital city of Malabo and he changed it into a presidential zone where the public was not allowed to come. So private business was suppressed. All foreign trade basically collapsed, and this destroyed the country's economy and basically made money worthless. And the people of the country were left to basically create a bartering system to survive because money had no value anymore. So they had to barter with each other. And Nguema kept everything that was supposed to be in the national treasury basically in a box under his bed at his house. He kept all the money in a box under his bed in his house. Now, remember, there are no more intellectuals, meaning there is no way to keep track of all the money that's being spent. Like, there's no accountants. There's no people like adding up money or like sending up warning flags like, hey, our economy is in serious trouble. No, because all of those people are dead. So there's no need for banks anymore because there's no money, no way to track it, no value to it. So all the country's wealth literally was stored under his bed. And exploitation, theft, starvation were very, very common among the people of the country as they were just fighting to survive in a non-existent economy. Like, just imagine if all the money that you had just immediately had no value and you just had to rely upon your skills to survive. Like, I think some of us could be in serious trouble because I don't know about you, but I work a desk job, so it might be a little rough. Anyways, many of the people were so desperate for money that they ended up joining military service to keep their families alive. Now, Nguema really wanted a strong military and dreamed of becoming a world power. Now, I don't want to squash his dreams or anything, but the entire population of that country was 2,800,000 people. So, to become a world power, I think you need more people than that to create a strong military. But, you know, who am I to say? So in 1971, all people, this I thought was adorable, all people were required to practice every single day with a wooden rifle. So as I was reading that, I was just picturing the color guards we have in the United States that spin wooden rifles as like a dance thing. Like, that's what I was picturing. That's not what it is. He obviously wanted them to practice like they were real guns. But yeah, it was mandatory that every person practice with a wooden rifle every single day. And then in 1976, he required all children from the age of 7 to 14 to mandatory military training. And any parent or child that refused this mandatory training would either be imprisoned or more than likely just shot on the spot and killed. So you weren't really given an option to do this military training. Now, along with his hatred of education, he hated any other cultures. And he banned any Western clothing, Western food, Western music. He was a tribal supremacist and never hid the fact that he hated other cultures, especially Spanish culture from Spain. Like, he despised it. He would send his marching youth group into the streets searching for any Spaniards, and he would have them killed because he didn't want any more influence from Spain. So this led to most people from Spain fleeing the country for their own safety, which was about 7,000 people fleeing the country to save their lives. He even banned this part. This is the mind-blowing part to me. He even banned Western medicine. He claimed that Western medicine was anti-African. What? Like, all the medical advances to save people from all these diseases and everything, he banned. He banned it all. So many people ended up dying of illnesses that could have been prevented. Like, he was so against medicine, like Western medicine, that later in his life, he couldn't hear very well. So he had to yell every time he talked, and he refused to get a hearing aid because it was Western medicine. Nope, couldn't have it. It was anti-African. What? If it helps your people, why would you not want it? Like, oh my goodness. That's just so crazy to me that he would ban that kind of stuff and kill his people because it offended him. Anyways, he fired all doctors. We've kind of talked about this. He fired all nurses and closed all hospitals. He closed all hospitals. So doctors and nurses fled for their lives because he quickly jailed or killed any doctor that remained. Like I said, there was only 2 doctors left in the country by the end of his rule. So by 1979, like I said, 1979, that's how long it took him to get rid of all the doctors. There's only 2 left by 1979. So in addition, he hated religious meetings. So in this country, it was predominantly Catholic. Most people were Catholic because, again, they had been conquered by Spain. Most Spaniards are Catholic, so they brought the Catholic Church to the country. Now, Nguema ordered that all priests in the Catholic Church praise him in their sermons, and all preaching had to be pre-approved. If they refused to do this, they were executed, tortured, or exiled. Christian names were all banned, and all Christian schools were closed. He, like I said, his favorite name was the unique miracle. He declared himself the national miracle. He was the miracle for the country. He was the only miracle that could happen in the country. And he genuinely believed that he should be worshipped. And at the end of every mass or any religious service, the parishioners should be chanting different praises to his name, and he required that his picture be hung in every single church. But eventually in 1974 through 1975, he banned all religious meetings. So he just got rid of all of it. And he decided that the only religion that people could be a part of was to worship him. And he made the country's official motto in 1978, quote, "There is no other God than Macias Nguema," end of quote. That was their national, why did my brain just stopped working? That was their country's motto, was there is no other God than Macias Nguema. Like, that is insane. Like, talking about being a narcissist, geez Louise. So he believed that all missionaries and priests were actually imperialist agents trying to turn the people away from his regime and overthrow his government. That's a big reason why he shut down all the religious entities, is because he believed that they were trying to turn the people away from him. He even ordered his military to watch the subversive activities of the Catholic and other missionaries. He genuinely believed that they were there to undermine him, which is nutso. So at this point, the people kind of saw what was going on. They saw, oh crap, we elected a dictator, and with corrupt judges and unfair trials, 25% of the country decided, it's time to get out of here. This is not a safe place. We need to leave. So they fled as refugees to nearby countries. Nguema would have none of this, though. He did not want his people leaving, so he would actually send his soldiers to hunt them down and bring them back. But there were so many people leaving that he could never catch all of them. There was just too many people fleeing the country. So he decided that instead of, hunting everybody down one by one, he would just close all the exits. And how would he do that, you might ask? So what he did is he banned all the boats, because part of this nation where the capital was an island. So he banned boats, so you couldn't use a boat to flee. And there was a road leading in and out of the country that he put landmines in. He covered in landmines. So if you tried to walk that road, you would get blown up. Not to mention that he had his military men put spike pits along the border to catch anyone who was trying to escape. So no matter what, if you tried to flee, there was no way out. And he even banned fishing boats. Like, you couldn't go fishing. He outlawed fishing because he was worried that you would flee the country if you went out fishing. Like, that's how intense this got. And he even denied that these people fleeing existed, because no one would obviously want to leave their paradise of a country. And he would say, even if these people did exist, they were just foreign agents there trying to make him look bad. They're coming from Spain. It's all Spain trying to make our country look bad. It wasn't. It was his actual population fleeing his dictatorship, but whatever, he can believe what he wants because he's delusional. Now, like I mentioned, he obviously favored his ethnic group and targeted other minority ethnic groups. Like the Palagu tribe faced a cholera epidemic. And how did he help them? Because this was a racial minority. How did he help them? Oh, he cut off all medical aid and financial aid, causing hundreds of people to die because he just didn't want to help them because they weren't part of his ethnic group, so it didn't matter. The residents of Annobon, an island that was part of Equatorial Guinea, had voted against him in the election. So obviously he needed to take his revenge on the people. So he ordered mass arrests that destroyed the island's population. It just basically got rid of the entire population of the island. Now, the Bubi people, I love their name, by the way. The Bubi people of Bioko were particularly targeted by Nguema's regime. Not only did they imprison them, abuse them, and seize their property, but he specifically targeted their leaders to dishearten them and destroy any belief that they would have power again. Like, for example, there was a pastor named Pastor Taroa Sikara. He was one of the Bubi's most important chiefs, and he was imprisoned and died of thirst. They never gave him water. And then another Bubi leader died of an infection after Nguema's forces gouged his eyes out, and then they got infected and he died from the infection. How gross. And another Bubi leader was tortured and killed in prison. He literally targeted every single one of their leaders and had them killed in horrible ways. Now, I have to point out, because this ties in, I promise, one of the most important exports in Equatorial Guinea was the cocoa bean. They had cocoa plantations, and the ability to harvest the cocoa bean was actually pretty dependent on Nigerian immigrant workers. It wasn't the people of Equatorial Guinea that worked these plantations. No, it was people of Nigeria. And they were known to be very hardworking people, very industrious, and that actually made them more wealthy than the native Equatorial Guinea people. Like, this made the people of Nigeria, the Nigerian immigrants in Equatorial New Guinea, an easy target for Nguema, because he would show people or tell people, like, look, they're stealing money from you. Look, they are taking your jobs away. And at one point, the Nigerian immigrant workers began to demand higher wages for all of their work on the cocoa plantations. So obviously, what had to happen? He killed them all. Yeah. The Nigerian government was understandably upset at the persecution and deaths of their people, because not only did he kill all of those workers who demanded high wages, they were being persecuted and targeted and abused and beaten by just the people of Equatorial Guinea because they didn't like that they were making more money, even though they worked harder in the plantations. So the Nigerian immigrants were encouraged by the Nigerian government to evacuate as soon as possible. So obviously they did. And this was a big issue. This was a huge problem. Between the Bubi and the Nigerian workers, they were the bulk of the labor force in Equatorial Guinea. So when they all fled, they had no workforce because no one else was working these things. So Nguema had to come up with a solution because, their economy is already tanking, and to lose your workforce, what are you going to do? Well, like any dictatorship, the solution was super obvious. Obviously, slavery. You had to enslave your own people, obviously. So people were forced to work on these cocoa plantations. As the country's economy dove even further into the ground, whole villages were actually arrested and sent off to be slave laborers at these cocoa plantations. Now, here's an idea of how bad the situation was. They needed 60,000 people to fill the need of the working of the plantations to save the economy. However, because of starvation, disease, escapees, mass imprisonment, there weren't enough people to fill this need. Even if they imprisoned every single person that was not in jail or killed or fleeing, they didn't have enough people. So they started forcing girls as young as 14 to join the slave labor. But it still wasn't enough. Their cocoa production was a fraction of what it was when Spain had ruled the country. So half the country's population at some point during Nguema's reign was actually imprisoned. Like, just owning a slice of Spanish ham could get you a 5-year prison sentence under Nguema. So half of the population of the country was imprisoned at one point in time. And their biggest prison was the Black Beach prison. And it was the most infamous prison that people were sent to. And more people went into that prison than actually left. So Nguema put his nephew, Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasango, see, I'm really bad at these names, in charge. And so he ran the prison, and his nephew did not fall far from the tree. He would torture prisoners just for his own amusement. He would kill prisoners for his own amusement. He was not a good guy, but he's important for later. Keep that in mind. So very few survivors came out of that prison, and the ones that did said that prisoners were forced to dance around a fire for hours to entertain the guards, and they would become so exhausted that they would just fall into the fire that they were dancing around, and the guards would then remove heated metal rods to beat them with until they would get up or until they just died. So many, many prisoners were beaten to death. And in June 1974, there was supposedly a coup plot taking place at a Bata jail where 114 political agents were close to overthrowing the government. And I'm doing air quotes around all of this because this is all supposed. This is a claim by Nguema, but there's no proof to actually back this up. So what did they do? You know, they all just happened to be killed in a prison uprising. Supposedly, they just happened to all die. All the conspirators. There were no survivors. And the proof, quote unquote proof, that this coup plot was happening were all confessions provided by Nguema's regime that supposedly all the dead prisoners had signed. But that information didn't come out till after all of them were dead. So basically the confessions were all fake and they killed them without actually knowing that there was a coup plot happening. So Nguema actually kept a prison available for himself, full of over 300 inmates. So he personally could go and torture them and kill them anytime he wanted. Literally, there's just a prison for him to go to, like a playground for him. How horrible is that? And he would order the execution of all of his former lovers. So anyone that he had been romantically involved with at any point in time, he ordered them all to be executed. Talk about bitter ex much. Jeez Louise. And then he would also order the murder of all the husbands of the women that he coveted. So how romantic. Like, I really want you, so I'm going to kill your husband. Ugh, this man. He is the worst. And at one point, he appointed a group of civil servants to the National Assembly, and they were all the ones that Nguema had selected to replace the ones he had murdered. And at some point they said, you know, we should maybe relax the isolation idea that we have where we're not trading with other countries and we're not interacting with other countries. Maybe we should relax that a little bit to kind of help the country. Now, they thought they were pretty safe because it was the majority vote. Like, all of them said, we need to relax this. Well, they were not safe. Nguema had them all arrested and tortured, and none of them were heard from again. So, even if you were in a position of power, you were not safe from Nguema and his ability to wipe you off from the face of the planet. So, he killed anyone he deemed a threat. Anyone. Even family. Like, he started appointing family as leaders because his paranoia started getting crazy bad. Like, he even killed a former ambassador who died after being dunked in a water barrel repeatedly over the span of weeks. Just because he was worried that this man was plotting against him. So he started appointing family members instead of other leaders because he felt like he could trust them. And basically, all of his extended family became the power of the state. Like, that's what happened because, as all dictators do, they start spiraling into insanity and paranoia. And that's exactly what was happening. So, in his paranoia, like, it got so bad that when the director of the Institute of Statistics published a study that found Nguema's approval was a little low, Nguema had the man dismembered to learn how to count better. That's air quotes. Learn how to count better. He had him dismembered. Yeah. And then when the governor of the central bank displeased him, he had the man's home village burned to the ground before he then executed that man. Like, this leader, Nguema, went to the extremes when it came to, oh, you displease me? Oh, you and everything you care about, dead, done. Like, in 1977, there were actually two brave villages, Mbe, I think is how you say it. It's Mbe, Mbe, and Ekokete. They resisted the horrible treatment from Nguema's men. They were like, no, we don't have to take this. This is not right. We will not stand for this. So, Nguema had their entire populations eradicated from the planet. That is what happened when you would stand up to Nguema. He would eradicate you and everyone that you cared about. So, he trusted no one. So he actually really started isolating himself and moved away from the capital, bringing, all the wealth of the country with him. And while he was in his own village, that's where he ran to isolate himself, he started practicing magic feng rituals where he would try to absorb the powers of dead people by praying to their skulls. So yeah, he's cracked a little bit and is literally losing his mind. He was obsessed with magic and even set up a table one night where he sat alone for hours and claimed that the whole time he was speaking to the spirits of the dead who had come to join him for dinner. Cuckoo, this guy has lost his mind. And he even smoked. So this probably didn't help the fact that he was super paranoia. He was super paranoia? What does that mean? He was super paranoid. He smoked marijuana and drank Imbaga, I think is what it's called. It's a drink in Africa that's actually a psychoactive drug that causes hallucinations. It's kind of like LSD, but it's a drink. And he was smoking marijuana. So between the two of those things, being a paranoid dictator, it was probably not a great idea to be on those drugs because it made it so much worse. And now that he's seeing hallucinations, he's literally losing his mind. Now, many of the people in the country actually believed that he had supernatural powers because his father had been a witch doctor and he was practicing all of this dark magic or whatever. So to enhance that vision of himself that he had special powers, he would invent plots that were trying to quote unquote kill him and magically survive, so the people really thought he was invincible. They were just like, oh, wow, how did he survive that? Oh, because he rigged it. That's why. Well, in 1979, the people closest to him realized that he had lost his mind, that he was literally insane. And after 11 years of ruling the country was broke. The government was barely functioning, if you could even call it that. And everything was basically a giant dumpster fire. The whole country was a giant dumpster fire. And no official records were being kept. Like I said, no one was educated. No one could keep track of any kind of records in the state or in the country. Even Nguema's own bodyguards had to hunt or scavenge for food to survive. That's how bad it was. Like, even being close to President Nguema was not an advantage for you. A very small fraction of the country had clean drinking water. Hardly anyone had electricity, and there was no good long-distance communications. Most of the population was either in prison or dead, or had fled the country. So it was a hot mess, giant dumpster fire, and after seeing his uncle destroy the country, his nephew, Obolongo Nguema, had enough. The sadist from the prison. So this is telling you it's not going in a great direction. But anyways, he had enough. And he decided to complete a coup to dethrone his uncle. And it was actually successful. And in August 1979, he took power, and Nguema's bodyguards initially supported him when Nguema fell, but they quickly realized that literally there were no other supporters of Nguema. Everyone was happy to see him go. So Nguema tried to flee the country with a suitcase of cash, but was quickly caught, probably because he couldn't take any of the roads to leave because they were covered in landmines. But he, as a petty revenge to his nephew, actually burned $100,000 in cash, which was the majority of the country's financial reserves. So to try and flee, he burned all the cash that was remaining for the country. So the country was literally broke. So in September of 1979, he was put on trial for genocide, embezzlement of public funds, which I hope included the burned money. He was put on trial for mass murder, torture of political prisoners, and burning entire villages. And it was basically a show trial because everybody knew he was guilty. And while he was on trial, people would be sitting in the audience just shouting out different atrocities that he had committed towards them or their family. So everybody knew he was guilty. And he was indicted for 80,000 murders, but he was only convicted of 500 of them. And on September 29th, 1979, he was sent to Black Beach Prison to be executed. Now, because everyone in the country believed that he had some kind of supernatural powers, no local men were willing to participate in the firing squad to kill Nguema. They actually were afraid that he would haunt them the rest of their lives. So they had to actually pull in a group of Moroccan mercenaries to be used as the executioners. And he was shot only 6 hours after the end of his trial. He was killed 6 hours after his trial. That's it. Didn't take him super long. So it is estimated that between 50,000 to 80,000 people were killed under the reign of Nguema. And for some perspective, the total population, like I said, was 280,000 people. So 80,000 of those 280,000 people were killed. That's 2/3 of the entire population. And another 25% of the population fled as refugees, never to come back. So the population of his country got decimated. Not to mention their GDP fell by 90%. 90%, that is insane. Infant mortality rates rose by 60%, so babies were dying at a record number. The life expectancy dropped to be 30 years old. You were only expected to live to be 30 years old. So I exceeded that now because I'm an old lady. Just kidding, I'm not that old. I'm in my 30s, so I'm not that old. But 30 years old, can you imagine only living, like that's as much as you're expected to live in that country. So this is why he earned the name of, or the nickname of Auschwitz of Africa, or Africa's Pol Pot, because he decimated his country. And I wish I could say that things got better under his nephew's rule, but that's just not the case. He is just about as bad, almost as bad as his uncle, but yeah. And just so you know, his nephew is still the ruler today. Like, he's still there. So those poor people, I hope that at some point these people will actually get to experience a good leader and experience progress in their country, because that just hurts my heart that they don't have those things and they're left with this horrible dictator who isn't as horrible as his predecessor, his uncle, but still, like, oh, it's so horrible. So because of Nguema's killing majority and imprisoning majority of his population of his country, by killing all the educated people in his country, leaving them years and years and years and years behind everyone else in the world. He is our horrible human in history. Now, I hope you enjoyed that story because, like I said, I had never heard of Francisco Macias Nguema ever. And I feel like it's an important story to be told. So make sure you're sharing this, liking, subscribing, so other people can hear these crazy stories that most people don't know about. Because I think it's important to know. And I think it's important to know that there are still people suffering under dictators, even today in our modern world. But join me next week where we are going to talk about a famous serial killer. And I'm sure you have all heard of him. Everyone's probably heard of this guy. And the reason why I chose him specifically out of all of the other options of serial killers that we have to choose from, the reason why I chose him specifically is because he actually hunted women and did that kind of stuff in the area where I live. So it's a little more personal, not because I was alive during that time period, definitely not, but he was in the area. So who is this person, you might ask? It is Ted Bundy. We are going to talk about Mr. Ted Bundy. So join me next week as we talk about the twisted tale of one of the most famous serial killers in the United States, Ted Bundy. Make sure you, like I said, you are liking, subscribing, and sharing. We want everybody to hear these crazy stories. I will see you guys next week on the next episode of Horrible Humans in History. See you guys later.